Raskolnikov, an impoverished student in St. Petersburg, grapples with despair, pride, and moral philosophy, contemplating the justification of extraordinary action. The oppressive urban environment reflects both social constraint and psychological tension, amplifying Raskolnikov's alienation and ethical questioning. Poverty, intellectual ambition, and moral theory converge to propel him toward the idea of committing murder. For perceived utilitarian and philosophical purpose, Raskolnikov murders the pawnbroker Alyona Ivanovna, rationalizing the act as service to humanity, yet immediately confronts guilt, fear, and moral dissonance. His sister Dunya and mother Pulcheria embody familial loyalty, love, and moral conscience, highlighting stakes of personal action within relational networks. Raskolnikov's psychological turmoil manifests in paranoia, delirium, and introspective conflict, reflecting internal consequences of moral transgression. The city of St. Petersburg functions as both setting and symbol, embodying moral corruption, social pressure, and existential alienation. Encounters with Marmeladov, Sonia, and other figures illustrate human suffering, ethical complexity, and capacity for empathy within social hierarchy. Sonia's piety, resilience, and compassion contrast with Raskolnikov's intellectual rationalization, providing ethical and spiritual counterpoint. Investigators, including Porfiry Petrovich, apply psychological insight and strategic reasoning, probing crime and conscience with subtle moral pressure. Raskolnikov vacillates between confession, justification, and evasion, reflecting oscillation between pride, guilt, and desire for moral absolution. Dialogues with peers and family reveal intellectual conflict, social expectation, and relational consequences of ethical choice. Sonia's influence encourages reflection on redemption, moral responsibility, and spiritual awakening, providing path toward ethical reconciliation. Raskolnikov experiences feverish delirium, symbolic of psychological crisis, social estrangement, and moral reckoning. Interactions with Svidrigailov expose moral corruption, self-interest, and manipulation, illustrating human capacity for moral ambiguity. The pawnbroker's murder ripples through St. Petersburg, entangling Raskolnikov in investigation, suspicion, and social scrutiny. Raskolnikov's internal debate between utilitarian reasoning and moral conscience highlights ethical tension central to narrative. Confessional impulses grow, guided by conscience, social expectation, and Sonia's ethical example, creating narrative tension and moral reflection. Poverty, social stratification, and alienation intensify existential and ethical reflection, shaping character action and narrative trajectory. Crime and psychological consequence intertwine, producing sustained examination of guilt, responsibility, and redemption. Raskolnikov's interaction with Sonia emphasizes love, humility, and moral insight as counterbalance to intellectual pride and despair. Moral and legal consequences converge, highlighting human interdependence, ethical expectation, and social consequence of action. Porfiry's dialogue embodies rational and ethical scrutiny, balancing legal procedure with psychological insight, probing both act and conscience. Raskolnikov confronts both external investigation and internal reflection, illustrating interplay between social and psychological accountability. Sonia guides ethical and spiritual reflection, fostering path toward confession, penitence, and moral rehabilitation. The narrative examines justification, pride, and human rationalization of transgression, exploring moral psychology and philosophical complexity. Raskolnikov's eventual confession signals moral awakening, acknowledgement of human limitation, and acceptance of social and spiritual norms. The Siberian penal colony embodies both punishment and opportunity for reflection, moral growth, and ethical reconciliation. Characters surrounding Raskolnikov illustrate moral and ethical contrasts, social expectation, and human capacity for compassion and corruption. Dostoevsky's psychological insight illuminates guilt, conscience, and human struggle between intellectual abstraction and moral reality. Raskolnikov experiences suffering, reflection, and incremental moral awareness, bridging personal redemption and ethical integration. Sonia's influence provides both emotional and spiritual support, guiding toward ethical resolution and reconciliation with human responsibility. Social, legal, and moral structures intersect, producing narrative richness and reflection on justice, conscience, and societal norms. Crime, punishment, and reflection serve as lenses for moral, psychological, and existential exploration, producing narrative cohesion. Raskolnikov's struggle embodies tension between intellect, emotion, and ethical conscience, revealing complexity of human moral deliberation. The Siberian setting symbolizes isolation, penance, and opportunity for moral reflection, emphasizing consequences and redemption. Characters exemplify moral diversity, social constraint, and human vulnerability, contributing to psychological and ethical tapestry. Dostoevsky examines alienation, poverty, intellectual pride, and moral consequence through detailed narrative and introspective reflection. Crime and punishment interrogates human morality, social context, and possibility of ethical rehabilitation, sustaining philosophical inquiry. Raskolnikov's transformation illustrates human capacity for conscience, empathy, and moral reconciliation amid suffering and adversity. Narrative tension, psychological insight, and moral reflection sustain engagement, blending suspense with ethical and existential inquiry. Society, family, and relational responsibility converge to frame individual moral challenge, highlighting consequences of transgression. Confession, penance, and ethical awakening represent narrative and moral culmination, illustrating potential for human growth. Dostoevsky's work synthesizes psychology, morality, and social observation, producing enduring reflection on ethical, personal, and societal dynamics. Raskolnikov's final moral and emotional state embodies reconciliation, awareness, and acceptance of human limitation and ethical responsibility. Crime and punishment remains central to exploration of conscience, guilt, redemption, and interplay of intellect, morality, and social reality.